Paul's yellow submarine socks. That made me very happy. I like to think that when everyone's left the room, he just looks down at his left foot and sings, and my toes are all aboard. And then many more of them live next door. Anyway, I'd like to welcome to the stage some people without which this wonderful film couldn't have been made. So we've got Naomi Jones, part of the wonderful duo. Okay, so Naomi's on her way, freelance investigative journalist, and we've got Steve Glenister, who's Catherine Anstey, producer. And our director, Arthur Carey. Are we all present, correct? Fantastic. Congratulations. That was a very heartwarming story. How did it feel? So, Steve, is that the first time you've seen it?
No, I was sent a link just after it was made, before it was edited completely. I was sent a link and I was able to watch it for the first time with just my wife.
This must have been a surreal journey for you, from sort of thinking that this was just sort of buried in the past, and at times sort of worrying to sort of think, okay, well, where's this going? Where's this going to end up?
It was a bit worrying, to be honest, because I think I tried to explain myself in the film that my biggest concern was dragging my family name on behalf of Dad through what something isn't too clever to do, really. So I was just a little bit concerned, and it went from an innocent conversation in an ambulance with Andy to sat here.
When did you realise it wasn't really going to go away? That you might have to sort of, in a way, confront what happened?
The first time really was when Nick contacted me on the telephone. I was on holiday in Spain and he rang up and explained the film, and he just sort of said, "We think we know a little bit more about it than you're letting on." I just said, "Okay." He said, "We've got some investigative journalists working on our behalf, and they've identified your surname on the electoral register for an McCartneys office." So that was when I thought, well, whatever I say now isn't going to sound authentic or real. I'm just going to be made to look silly. So I just said, well, yeah, it was my dad. My dad next to me.
Did you have to talk it over with anyone? Did you sort of?
No, not really. I didn't have to talk it over with anyone. I didn't. Initially, when I spoke to Nick, it was just they found this guitar. So that was the story. That was it. So I just explained how it got through our family. I didn't envisage this film, the documentary, the newspaper reports and things like that going on. So I didn't think I'd have to explain anything. I didn't think it would be anything that my family would recognise or see or even come across really. So it wasn't going to be as aired as it has been. So at the time I didn't think I had to speak to anyone.
Catherine, when did you, and I guess Arthur as well, when did you realise that you had a film on your hands? You had sort of this was unfolding in a very sort of in a narrative arc that must have been very pleasing to sort of flesh out.
Yeah, I think to start with, I mean, there was the amazing roadmap that we had from Naomi and Scott and Nick in terms of the investigation and the hunt and the characters involved in that. I think both of us, when we started, we were aware that it was a 6-decade story, so there was also an element that felt mildly overwhelming, I think, in terms of how you cover that in a film whilst telling this incredible hunt story that we had. But the base was a real gift in many ways, and that it just so happened that it dropped into really wonderful parts of Paul's story as well. So you had Pre
Yeah, I mean, you know, the bass is a MacGuffin in a way, because it has value, but it's not so much the instrument itself, which...
Maybe explain what a MacGuffin is.
Well, a MacGuffin is a sort of an object, a device that is in itself not of great value, but it's attached to value. And I think it's a way through a story, and the object, which Paul bought for £30 in Hamburg, has enormous value because of its connection to him, and because of its connection to a pre-Beatlemania Paul, an 18-year-old Paul, who was still finding his way in the world, with this bass in his hands. And it's taken on even more value now because it brings people like Steve and Scott and Naomi and Nick and Ian Horn and all these other people into the story.
Yeah.
So that was the sort of big gift in a way. I think there's been so much said about the Beatles, so much written, so many films made, but it's lovely to be able to make a film that places, for lack of a better word, sort of normal people alongside Paul. I think one of the great joys is having Paul sit in this film alongside Steve and Andy and Scott and Naomi, and for all of them to have, the same right to be part of the same story.
And we'll come to the getting of Paul, the participation of Paul in this film shortly. I just wanted to turn to you, Naomi, and it just occurred to me earlier on that obviously you and Scott are investigative journalists. Watching television with you guys must be very different to watching television with most other people.
I guess one thing I'd say about watching this film is that Arthur and Catherine have done the most incredible job of bringing our investigation search to life, but also the significance of the dates as well. And one of the things that I discovered when we were looking for it is how much it means to people like Ian, who've been looking, searching for it for over 50 years, or actually how much it means to you as well.
So take me back to that, even watching Glastonbury, the club, and so was it Scott first of all that sort of had that initial sort of curiosity? I mean, is this how it is at home with you guys all the time? If someone just spots something, I wonder if there's a story behind that.
Well, interestingly, we might be starting to look for other lost objects of cultural significance as well. Yeah.
On the back of this?
Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. Fantastic. Okay, let's turn to, so you've got this incredible story, and obviously it'd be amazing to sort of have the participation of Paul. How do you get that ball rolling along?
Gosh, I mean, that sort of predates me coming onto it, because I think it was through Naomi and Scott and Nick. They had built this relationship, they'd returned the base, and I think there was a conversation.
Exactly.
We must be making a film.
Yeah, so we've developed a relationship and spoken particularly to Paul's nephew, who's his lawyer as well, and they said that they would support us with any documentary that we wanted to make.
And I guess that means that suddenly it means you can use the music, right?
Yeah, so what happened, we came on and there was a sort of, some filming had been done, so after we filmed the bass being returned in the studio, and then the O2 concert, which was very amazing, so we had this lovely end to the film by the time I came onto it. But then everything from there forward, I would say there was a sort of ongoing relationship that was built with NPL, which is Paul's company. And they have been just extraordinarily supportive and brilliant throughout the whole thing. But it was a sort of hold your nerve thing, I would say, in the music. There was a sort of, Arthur and I felt very ambitious from the beginning, and I think early conversations were like, oh, could we maybe do 4 songs, do we think? And so we had Gary, she was the amazing piece but he advised brilliantly, and again, NPL was just amazing in terms of the relationship with the trust, and I think a lot of it came down to the trust and then loving the film at the end. And so we just kept sort of squeezing more Beatles tracks in, hoping that we'd come good by the end.
So Arthur, you were there at the moment of the handover then of the bass?
Yeah, I was there to see it being restored, and then we got this window of opportunity to film Paul taking possession of it for the first time again, and playing on it for the first time. And what's lovely about that scene watching it back is that the first recognisable Beatles bass line to come out of that bass once he got it back in his hands is the bass line from Day Tripper.
Yes.
And then I find myself a few months later with lovely Andy, Steve's friend, and I hope you won't mind me saying, but there he is sort of slightly mangling Day Tripper. So it got better once he plugged it into an amp.
Is Andy here, by the way?
Andy is here. There he is. There he is. First time Andy's seen it tonight, so yeah. I hope it's all right.
Andy, yeah, well, you're right to because Andy's a very important part of the story because you know you sort of spotted, like you mentioned it to Steve, and you know on it kind of rapidly evolved from there. It's so many incredible. Another thing I love about this, going back to you, Steve, is there's a social history dimension to it as well, and you know it does take us back to this age. You know, I was slightly reminded of what that kind of feeling I had of watching Life on Mars whenever that was on, about 15 years ago. It's just an age where, for better or for worse, things were done differently, and there was the guy, the pub landlord had this sort of was more than a pub landlord, should we say. Must be very evocative watching it back and seeing some of those, some of the reconstructions, of that era.
Yeah, it's like I said in there. You could go into the pub, the local pub. It's called locally it's known as the Cow Shed. It's actually named Kettle, but it's known locally as the Cow Shed. And people would just go in there. It would be everyone would go in there locally, and there would just be topics of conversation from sport to local news to who got beat up the night before and who got whacked over the end of the glass. And then it's just, you could go in and buy a puppy, a box of fruit, there was just anything and everything. And so it was just, it was fun, actually. It was good fun. Compared to where we are now in this day and age, back then it was just fun.
It's that whole culture of knowing a bloke who can, I remember my dad who ran a fish and chip shop, and that was similar to being a pub landlord. He proudly pointed at his feet and said, I've never had to go to a shoe shop to buy a pair of shoes. I still don't know exactly what he meant by that. I don't think I want to know either. Did you get a lot of time with Paul?
Paul's incredibly generous. He's quite a busy guy still. He's about to turn 84, but he's just played a couple of gigs in LA. He's just released a new album. So he was incredibly generous to let us film with him 4 times if you include a little FaceTime into the potting shed in the garden when it was being restored. But no, he was incredibly generous with his time, and I think tickled by the story, very supportive of the story from the start, which is why we talk about, how much Beatles music really was good in there. I think that NPL, and many of them here tonight, were incredibly generous because they knew, how much Paul liked the story, was keen for the story to get out. So yeah, we filmed with them twice, playing it again for the first time. There was, another time when they were first taking the bass apart, and then we got to sit down with him, in July last year.
Whose idea was it to come up with the caption "Guitartisan"?
It was actually Martin Harrison, the Guitartisan himself. He's self-titled Guitartisan. I love it.
Very good, very, very good. Lovely to see Klaus Forman in there as well, really evoking those early days of Hamburg, and just the charm of these 4 guys from Liverpool just kind of parachuted into your hometown. He was very obliging, wasn't he, with the drawings and And you know, even getting into bed and
I'm not sure if he knew what he was doing at that stage. He was just doing what he was asked to do. But Klaus is incredible. I mean, he's 88 and plays tennis every morning. I think he had his little finger chopped off just after we filmed, but that's no bother for Klaus. And still working incredibly hard, living south of Munich by a lovely lake. And no, he's amazing. He's a whole film in himself, really. He was in Manfred Mann, and he plays bass as a session bass player on Lennon's solo albums and on George Harrison's. And I loved his Revolver album cover. And I think it was a conversation from very early on about whether we could incorporate his drawings. And given that he was there when Paul first bought the bass, he was more than happy to oblige. Some of his drawings are outside, so if you haven't really looked at them up close, have a little look. 3 of the original drawings are outside, and then prints of a few more.
Have those been lent to you, presumably?
I'm just going to forget to give them back.
Well, yeah, and then there'll be a documentary made about it. Naomi, how many leads did you pursue before realising that, you know, the gentleman to your right might be?
Well, I think to start off with, Nick had some leads that looked like they could, that they were good. And so I think probably for about a month or so, they were pursued. So then we had all these weird, wonderful 600 emails. One saying that it was at Mar-a-Lago and
Was there any context given to the Mar-a-Lago play? Was it from the president himself? He lies about everything else, so why would he lie about that?
But it was that email from Ian that set this whole sort of snowball in place of found a lead after an email to that. So it was Ian that set was really important.
Yeah. Wow. Steve, was it? It must have been important to hear Paul say about your dad that he doesn't blame you too much.
Yeah, I mean, it was nice. Obviously, I've had the opportunity to speak to Mr. McCartney himself, but it was nice to hear on the film that he, you know, doesn't hold any grudges as such, because it must have been, as he said, if you had something huge, you wanted it back, and it must have been, you know, quite nice for him to have his guitar back, I would have thought.
I should say, I mean, you know, Steve sort of underplays how brave he was to sort of come forward. The film doesn't exist without Steve coming forward. And I think that we'd already had conversations with Paul where we knew that Paul felt zero ill will. In fact, I think he's probably pleased that the bass was stolen and had the journey it's had, because, you know, he loves a good story. And he didn't miss it much at first. But it took time with Steve to persuade him that, you know, understandably, that you know, nobody was going to see George as the bad guy in all of this, which he really isn't. And you know, it's very exposing for Steve to have taken part in this. But
Of course, I think everyone's very great.
he's sort of the glue, really, the key to the whole thing.
Actually, I know I think he had a train to catch, but we've also got Ian Horn in the house, who's in the film, very important part of the film. Paul's roadie and sound engineer, who wishes he had parked the car was it Pembridge Gardens?
Cambridge Gardens and Ladbroke Road.
So a round of applause to Ian as well. One thing I also sort of found fascinating is this sort of the guitar as a sort of metric of interest in the Beatles story at different points in time. So, you know, we had around the time it was stolen, you know, Paul sort of fairly casual reaction, which is, I don't want to go another one. And then, because that was sort of the decade where he was trying to put the Beatles behind him. That's a sort of interesting thing, isn't it? How it's kind of share index almost has sort of gone up and down. Was that a useful kind of thing to hold on to when telling the story.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it was, like I say, because it was covering 6 decades, and so it was this amazing gift that you could trace Paul and the Beatles and their sort of how they were perceived through history at the time, and again that sort of moment with Elvis, you know, when it comes back and he kind of comes to terms again with his past, music and performing again. So it did feel like a real gift, I think.
Yeah, I think it's a sort of symbol of you know, the enduring affection that everyone has for the Beatles, that even when Paul wanted to sort of leave it behind for a while.
It's great that you've got Elvis Costello there, who is sort of the kind of, when the trip switch goes from this thing, but like even Paul sort of not really sort of wondering if what relevance he has to who he was prior to his work with Elvis, and then Elvis saying, well no, what it, you know, and then that's kind of the dominoes topple onto the present day. That was absolutely incredible.
Yeah, we were very lucky to get Elvis, and I think that I we told you it was an amazing interviewee, but also he's just so passionate about their music, and you know, he had that connection as well from when he was a child. And that amazing thing with, I think, almost, which surprised me, almost everyone that we filmed with had these very formative memories of the Beatles and their music, you know, whether it was Elvis or Graham or, you know, whoever it was, you talked to them about those early days of hearing songs for the first time.
Yeah.
It was such a huge thing for people. So it was lovely to be able to kind of tap into that, I think, but then for Elvis to also be a really key part of the Beatle base and, you know, bringing it back was
We've got time for one more question, and it's a fairly trivial one, but I'm raging with curiosity. What was that completely empty room that you pulled Paul in, that had literally nothing else in?
That was
Almost looked like a hostage situation.
it's the building. It's the building next door to One Soho Square, which is where MPL have been established for a long time. And at that time, it was empty and awaiting new occupants. So we got the choice of a few rooms and chose that one.
Highly convenient. Wonderful stuff. Okay, I'm going to try and get this in the right order, but thank you very much, all of you. Steve, Catherine, Arthur, Naomi, and Ian, of course, and Andy. Thank you all for your very, very significant parts in making this a heartwarming. Thank you very much. Thanks all for coming, and good best of luck with it. I eagerly await to see what your next investigations yield.